Before you ever look at a man and wonder who he is, you must first know who you are. This is where most women lose their power. They seek identity in someone else before they have carved their own. When you do not know yourself, you are vulnerable to anything he tells you, to any image he projects, to any illusion he sells. But when you know who you are, you become untouchable. You see through charm. You see through lies. You see through weakness disguised as strength. And when you see clearly, you command respect, because no one can manipulate a woman who is grounded in her own identity. Knowing who you are starts with clarity. Clarity about your values, your purpose, and your standards. Ask yourself, what do I believe in? What do I stand for? What kind of life am I building for myself? Too many women ask, what does he bring to the table, without first building their own table? And here's the truth: if you don't build your own table, you will always be begging for a seat at his. That is not the posture of a queen. A queen knows her worth before she even considers who sits beside her. You must know your strengths. What are you gifted at? What can you do that no one else can? Where do you shine? When you know your strengths, you no longer need validation from him to feel valuable. You stop waiting for compliments to feel beautiful, for approval to feel strong, for attention to feel worthy. Strength is not given by others, it is discovered within yourself. Men respect a woman who knows her strengths because she radiates certainty, and certainty is magnetic. But knowing yourself also means being brutally honest about your weaknesses. Do not hide them, do not run from them. Face them head on. If you know you are impatient, work on it. If you know you settle too easily, raise your standards. If you know you crave attention, discipline yourself until you can walk in silence without needing anyone's applause. Weakness ignored becomes a chain. Weakness confronted becomes fuel. Men cannot exploit a weakness that you have already mastered. And when you stand in the arena of life, battle-tested and self-aware, you walk with a presence that no man can overlook. Identity is not just about what you do, it's about who you choose to be. Too many define themselves by their relationships, their jobs, or their appearances. But true identity is deeper. It's about your core. If tomorrow you lost everything you own, who would you still be? If tomorrow no man ever validated you again, would you still stand tall? That is the test of self-knowledge. If your identity crumbles without external validation, then you never knew yourself in the first place. But if you can stand firm without applause, without approval, without attention, then you have built an identity that cannot be shaken. Respect begins here. A woman who knows who she is doesn't chase, it's the man who pursues her. She doesn't beg, it's the man who works to earn her. She doesn't question her worth, it's the man who rises to meet her standards. And here's the truth: men treat you based on the standard you set for yourself. If you are unsure of your worth, they will test you, push boundaries, and treat you as replaceable. But if you know your worth, they either step up or step aside. That is the power of identity. Knowing who you are also gives you vision. When you know your destination, you do not get lost following his. Too many women wander into relationships blind, hoping he will lead them somewhere great. But if you don't have your own vision, you'll follow him even if he is walking off a cliff. You cannot ask where he is going until you know where you are going. Otherwise, you risk building a life around his dream while abandoning your own. And a queen never abandons her throne to sit as a servant in someone else's kingdom. Self-knowledge sharpens your instincts. It allows you to detect energy, to sense intention, to see beyond words. When you know yourself, you recognize when someone's actions don't align with their promises. You stop falling for sweet talk because you measure people by consistency, not by charm. You stop being impressed by superficial gestures because your identity has taught you that your worth cannot be bought with cheap attention. You begin to value character over charisma, substance over style, truth over flattery. And men notice this. They know they cannot fool you. They know they cannot buy you with words. They know that if they want to stand beside you, they must rise in integrity. Finally, knowing who you are creates an aura. It is something you cannot fake. It's in the way you walk, the way you carry yourself, the way you enter a room. Confidence does not come from makeup. clothes, or likes on a screen. True confidence comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to shrink for anyone. When a woman with this aura walks in, men stand straighter, voices soften, and eyes pay attention. It is not arrogance, it is presence. And presence is born from identity. When you look at relationships, most people start with the wrong question. They ask, who is he? What does he bring? What is his status? What does he have? But none of that matters if you haven't first answered the deeper question, woe am I? Without that foundation, every relationship you build will be fragile because you're trying to define yourself through someone else instead of standing strong in your own identity. Respect begins with self-definition, not with what someone else offers you. Knowing who you are means you stop living life as a mirror, reflecting whatever others expect of you, and you start living as a flame burning with your own light. If you don't know your own values, you'll adopt his. If you don't know your own purpose, you'll follow his. If you don't know your own worth, you'll beg for his attention like it's oxygen. That's why women who lack self-awareness often end up in cycles of disappointment. They measure themselves by how a man treats them instead of by the standards they set for themselves. The truth is this: a queen cannot be crowned by anyone but herself. If you are waiting for a man to define you, you have already handed him your crown. But when you define yourself, when you know your essence, when you recognize your own greatness, you don't need his validation to feel complete. Instead, you invite him into your life as a partner, not as a savior. That shift alone changes how men see you, because men respect what stands tall without needing their approval. To know who you are, you must study yourself the way others study success. What drives you? What drains you? What standards will you never compromise? Too many women know more about a celebrity's biography than their own. They know his likes, his dislikes, his career, his goals, but if you ask them about their own mission, they hesitate. That hesitation is dangerous because if you don't have a mission, you'll always attach yourself to his. And when you attach yourself to his mission, you lose the power to create your own legacy. Your identity must be built on more than appearance, titles, or possessions. Beauty fades, jobs change, circumstances shift, but identity anchored in character, in discipline, in resilience, that is unshakable. When you know you are strong, you don't collapse when life throws weight at you. When you know you are intelligent, you don't silence your voice to make him feel comfortable. When you know you are worthy, you don't lower your standards just to keep someone in your life. You stand tall even if you stand alone, because you recognize that solitude with dignity is far greater than company with disrespect. There is also power in understanding your emotional blueprint. What are your triggers? What are your patterns? Where do you compromise too easily? Self-awareness is not just about celebrating your strengths, but about confronting your weaknesses with honesty. If you know you're quick to trust, train yourself to observe before you commit. If you know you crave validation, discipline yourself to find it internally instead of externally. The woman who knows her weaknesses is untouchable because she does not allow anyone to use them against her. Men sense identity. They can feel it in your energy before you ever speak. A woman who knows herself doesn't ask questions like, do you love me? Do you value me? Do you think I'm enough? She already knows the answer within herself. Instead, her questions are sharper. Does this relationship align with my vision? Does this man meet the standard I've set? Does his life path complement mine? That is the power of identity. It changes the entire dynamic from needing validation to filtering alignment. When you know who you are, you also know what you will not tolerate. You set boundaries with steel, not with fear. You do not beg a man to respect you. You expect it, and if he cannot deliver, you walk away without hesitation. Men respect the woman who is not afraid to leave because she proves that her self-worth is not tied to his presence. Walking away is not weakness, it is strength because it shows you would rather protect your dignity than protect an illusion. There is also something magnetic about certainty. Think about it, the most attractive leaders in history are not the ones who had all the answers, but the ones who carried themselves with certainty. Certainty makes people lean in, makes them listen, makes them follow. The same is true with you. When you know who you are, you carry an aura of certainty that makes men pay attention. They know they cannot play games with you because you're not confused about your own worth. They know they cannot manipulate you because you're not desperate for their validation. They know they cannot diminish you because your identity is already unshakable. This is why the foundation of any relationship is not in asking who he is, but in knowing who you are, because the answer to that question determines everything else. If you know who you are, you attract men who align with your strength. If you don't, you attract men who prey on your uncertainty. Respect is not granted by chance, it is commanded by clarity. And clarity only comes when you dare to look inward and define yourself before you ever look outward to define him. The mistake many people make in relationships is that they begin by trying to figure out the other person. They ask questions like, is he loyal? Is he serious? Is he ready for commitment? But here's the truth, if you do not first know yourself, then none of those answers matter. You cannot measure whether he is right for you if you have no clear understanding of who you are. Identity comes before compatibility, and self-awareness comes before expectations. Without that, you will always be searching outside for what can only be built inside. To know who you are, you must begin with values. What do you stand for? What principles guide your decisions? If you don't know your values, you will compromise them for someone else's approval. And when you compromise your values, you weaken your foundation. Men respect women who know their values because they see that her decisions are not swayed by flattery or pressure. A woman with strong values cannot be bought, cannot be manipulated, cannot be broken. Her values act like armor, protecting her from settling for less than she deserves. The next step is vision. Who do you want to become? Where are you heading? Too many women are clear about what they want in a man, but unclear about what they want in themselves. They build a list of qualities he must have, but never define the qualities they must develop. This imbalance leads to disappointment, because you cannot expect to align with someone else's vision if you have no vision of your own. Knowing yourself means being intentional about your own future before asking whether someone else fits into it. Self-knowledge also means emotional strength. Relationships often expose our insecurities, and if we do not know them beforehand, we end up projecting them onto others. If you are insecure about abandonment, you might cling too tightly. If you are insecure about rejection, you might settle for mistreatment just to avoid being alone. If you are insecure about self-worth, you might overcompensate by proving yourself to a man who does not even deserve your effort. But when you know your emotional triggers, you gain power, you recognize your patterns, you heal them, and you no longer allow them to control your choices. This makes you unshakable, and men can sense that strength immediately. Part of knowing yourself is also defining your standards. Standards are not demands, they are boundaries that protect your dignity. Without standards, you leave the door open for disrespect. With standards, you filter out anyone who cannot rise to the level you require. Men test boundaries, it is in their nature, but when a woman knows her standards, she enforces them without hesitation. She doesn't ask, will he respect me? Because she knows respect is non-negotiable. The only question is whether he qualifies to remain in her presence. Identity is not static, it is shaped by discipline. Knowing who you are also means knowing what habits define your life. Do you live with focus, or do you live by impulse? Do you pursue growth, or do you settle for comfort? The habits you live by determine the kind of men you attract. A woman with discipline attracts men who respect discipline. A woman with chaos attracts men who thrive in chaos. Men treat you based on the environment you create, and that environment is built on your daily habits. Self-awareness also builds confidence. Real confidence is not about appearance or popularity. It is about certainty in your identity. When you know who you are, you do not walk into a room seeking attention. You walk in knowing you belong there. You do not need to compete with others because you are rooted in your own uniqueness. This confidence shifts the balance in relationships because instead of asking, will he choose me? Your mindset becomes, does he deserve me? That shift alone commands respect. Another aspect of knowing yourself is independence. Independence is not rejecting partnership, it is refusing dependency. If you do not know yourself, you risk attaching your entire identity to a man. You risk making his validation your oxygen, his presence your security, his decisions your direction. But when you know yourself, you create independence. You build your own foundation, your own dreams, your own fulfillment. From this position, you do not enter a relationship because you need him. You enter because you choose him. That choice is powerful, and it transforms how he treats you. When you know yourself, you also know what you are capable of achieving. You no longer settle for small roles in someone else's story. You take center stage in your own. This sense of purpose radiates outward, and men recognize it immediately. They know they are not dealing with someone who can be distracted by temporary pleasures or shallow promises. They know they are dealing with a woman who is aligned with her mission. And men who understand strength will treat her as such because her identity leaves no room for anything less. In the end, everything about relationships, respect, and power traces back to this principle. Know who you are before asking who he is. Because if you do not know yourself, you will believe whatever he tells you. You will see him through the lens of your insecurities rather than through the clarity of your identity. But when you do know yourself, you stop chasing, you stop begging, you stop doubting, you set the standard, you command the respect, and you decide who is worthy to walk beside you. The foundation of power, respect, and dignity in any relationship lies in identity. Before you ever concern yourself with who he is, you must have full command over who you are. Without that, you will always be measuring yourself by his standards, his moods, and his opinions. And when you live that way, you are no longer leading your life. You are simply reacting to his. But when you know who you are, you build a fortress inside yourself that no one can shake. That is where true respect begins. Too many women begin relationships like blank pages, waiting for a man to write the story. They adapt, they mold, they compromise endlessly just to be accepted. And in the process, they lose themselves. This is why so many end up exhausted, asking, why doesn't he respect me? The answer is simply, if you don't respect yourself enough to define who you are, you cannot expect him to do it for you. Respect always begins internally. A queen does not hand over her crown for someone else to place on her head. She wears it because she already knows it belongs to her. Knowing who you are requires deep self-examination. What do you value? What do you tolerate? What do you reject outright? Without these answers, you live without boundaries. And without boundaries, people will test you endlessly. Men test boundaries not out of cruelty, but out of instinct. They want to see how far they can go, how much they can take, how much you will allow. But if you know yourself, you don't hesitate to enforce limits. You don't negotiate with disrespect. You don't excuse bad behavior. You cut it off the moment it threatens your dignity. That decisiveness comes only from identity, and men respect what is decisive. When you know yourself, you no longer fear solitude. This is where many women get trapped. They don't know themselves, so they believe their worth is tied to being chosen. They think being single means being incomplete. But when you truly know yourself, you realize solitude is not punishment, it is power. It is the time where you grow, where you build, where you discover your strength. From this position, you don't settle for companionship that disrespects you just to avoid being alone. You would rather walk alone in dignity than be held by someone who doesn't value your crown. And that is why men treat you differently, because they can feel that you are not afraid to stand on your own. Knowing yourself also clarifies your vision for life. Too many people jump into relationships without asking where they are going. They just want someone, anyone, to fill the void. But a woman who knows herself has a destination. She has goals, she has a mission, and when you have a mission, you stop asking whether he looks good on paper and start asking whether he aligns with your path. Because you understand that love without alignment leads to chaos. A queen with vision does not lose herself chasing someone else's dream. She walks her own path, and only allows men who complement it, not distract from it. Another element of knowing yourself is emotional mastery. If you do not understand your triggers, your insecurities, your patterns, then you will sabotage your own relationships without realizing it. If you are insecure about being abandoned, you may cling too tightly. If you are insecure about your worth, you may overcompensate by giving too much. If you are insecure about rejection, you may accept disrespect just to keep the peace. But when you know yourself, you shine a light on these insecurities. You discipline them, you grow past them, and you refuse to let them dictate your actions. Men cannot exploit what you have already mastered. That is why a woman who knows herself is so hard to manipulate, because she has already confronted her own shadows. There is also a presence that comes with identity. You can see it when a woman walks into a room, whether she knows herself or not. It's in the way she carries her posture, in the steadiness of her eyes, in the confidence of her voice. Real confidence is not about being loud or flashy. It's about the quiet certainty of knowing you don't have to prove yourself to anyone. This aura cannot be faked. It is built through years of self-awareness, discipline, and clarity. And when a man sees that, he knows he is dealing with someone who cannot be swayed easily. He knows he must rise to her level, because she will never lower herself to his. When you know who you are, you stop asking small questions like, does he like me? Does he want me? Does he think I'm good enough? Those questions disappear because you already know the answer within yourself. Instead, your mindset shifts. You begin asking, does he align with my standards? Does he add to my vision? Does he deserve a place in my life? This change in perspective transforms everything, because now the power is in your hands. You are not waiting to be chosen, you are choosing, and that is the essence of being treated like a queen. The truth is, men sense identity. They know when a woman is rooted in who she is, and when she is not. They know when they can test limits and when they cannot. They know when they are dealing with someone who commands respect simply by her presence. That kind of respect cannot be demanded, cannot be begged for. It is earned by clarity, by boundaries, by vision, by discipline, by confidence. And that clarity only comes when you stop obsessing over who he is and start mastering who you are. Respect power and love all flow from identity. Before you ever look at a man and wonder what kind of person he is, you must already know who you are. Without this foundation, you are like a ship with no anchor, drifting wherever the tide of his words or actions pulls you. But when you know yourself, you are immovable. You are grounded in values, anchored in vision, and solid in standards. This is the kind of woman who commands respect without asking for it, because her very presence speaks for her. The problem many women face is that they approach relationships with empty hands, expecting a man to fill them. They ask questions like, is he ambitious? Is he kind? Is he stable? Is he ready for commitment? While never stopping to ask themselves, am I ambitious? Am I kind? Am I stable? Am I ready for commitment? The danger here is simple. If you don't know who you are, you will project your emptiness onto him, and you will expect him to complete you. But no man can complete you. He can only complement you. Completion is your responsibility. And once you grasp that, you stop looking for saviors and start looking for equals. Knowing who you are begins with self-definition. You must define your worth before the world does it for you. If you don't define it, men will try to. Some will define you by your looks, others by your body, some by your status, others by what you can give them. But when you know who you are, you define yourself beyond these shallow categories. You know your worth is not measured by attention, but by the strength of your character. You know your beauty is not limited to your reflection, but shines through your discipline, your resilience, and your confidence. A woman who defines herself cannot be confined by anyone else's definition. You must also know your standards. Standards are not walls to keep people out. They are gates that filter who gets in. Without standards, you will entertain anyone who knocks on the door of your life. With standards, you only allow those who align with your values and your vision. And here's the truth: men respect standards even when they complain about them. A man may resist, he may push, he may test, but deep down he respects the woman who refuses to bend her standards, because he knows she values herself enough not to settle. And if he cannot meet them, he also knows she has the strength to walk away. Self-awareness also means knowing your purpose. Who are you outside of relationships? What is your mission in life? A woman without purpose can easily become lost in his. She becomes whatever he needs her to be because she has no clear direction of her own. But a woman with purpose cannot be swayed. She knows her path and she is committed to walking it whether he joins her or not. Men are drawn to this energy because it is rare. It is the energy of a queen who does not pause her crown to follow someone else's dream. Instead, she builds her kingdom and allows a man to add to it if he is worthy. Another key aspect of knowing yourself is emotional intelligence. If you do not understand your emotions, they will control you. You might confuse infatuation with love, attention with respect, possession with protection. But when you know yourself, you understand your emotional patterns. You recognize when you're acting out of fear instead of strength, when you're tolerating nonsense just to avoid loneliness, when you're giving too much just to be validated. A woman with emotional intelligence is powerful because she is not ruled by impulse. She makes decisions rooted in clarity, not desperation. And this clarity forces men to approach her differently because they know she cannot be swayed by cheap tactics. Confidence is the visible result of identity. When you know who you are, confidence becomes natural. It's not about arrogance, it's about certainty. Certainty in your value, certainty in your vision, certainty in your presence. This certainty shows in the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you make decisions. You stop second guessing yourself because you already know where you stand. And when a man sees this kind of confidence, it shifts how he interacts with you. He cannot treat you casually because your presence demands seriousness. He cannot treat you recklessly because your aura demands respect. There is also freedom in knowing yourself, freedom from comparison, freedom from insecurity, freedom from the need to be chosen. You stop looking at other women as competition because you understand that no one can compete with authenticity. You stop questioning whether you are enough because you know you are whole. You stop worrying about being replaced because you know your uniqueness cannot be replicated. This freedom terrifies insecure men but attracts strong men because they see that you are not driven by fear, you are driven by self-mastery. Ultimately, knowing who you are shifts the entire dynamic of relationships. You stop entering them as a seeker, hoping someone else will define you. Instead, you enter as a chooser, deciding who deserves access to your world. You no longer ask, "Will he love me?" You ask, "Does this align with the woman I have chosen to become?" That shift changes everything because it places the power where it belongs, in your hands, and men instinctively recognize that power. They know they are not dealing with someone who needs them, but with someone who has chosen to allow them into her life. That is the difference between being treated casually and being treated like a queen.